Hi everybody. I'm Gary Rosinski. I'm the Massachusetts State Coordinator for Citizens Climate Lobby, and tonight we have a special session where we'll be hearing Casey Bowers, who's from the Environmental League of Massachusetts. Casey is the Vice President of Government Affairs and the Executive Director of the ELM Action Fund. And tonight, Casey will be telling us about Environmental League of Massachusetts legislative agenda and what they hope to be seeing from the legislature in this current session. So we'll let Casey talk. I think she has a couple of slides she might want to share with us. And then after she completes her remarks, we will we'll have some Q&A. So Casey, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Gary, and thank you all for allowing me to join this evening. As Gary mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs as well as the Executive Director of the Action Fund, in which role I kind of oversee all of our lobbying and electoral work. I had created a few slides, but given kind of maybe some of the informal nature of this, I'll just skip through some of it and I can just talk briefly about what we're focusing on at the state level. I certainly appreciate all the work you all have been doing at the federal level, and given this, heightened level of uncertainty federally, we really believe that the state needs to lead. So you actually have us on the 127th birthday of ELM. We were founded back in the 1920s around the formation of the state park system, and have gradually shifted our focus as the needs of climate have shifted as well. So some of our big successes have been around the Global Warming Solutions Act in 2008, as well as the Next Generation Roadmap in 2001. Our main focus is building an equitable green economy, reducing emissions, protecting our natural resources, while at the same time advancing environmental justice and public health. We're pretty proud of some of the successes we saw just last year with the Omnibus Climate Bill that really reforms clean energy siting and permitting, so we don't so it doesn't take 7 years to site renewable energy, as well as committing to energy storage, increasing access to reliable EV charging, strengthening our offshore wind industry, and prioritizing electrification of homes and businesses. Additionally, for one of the first times ever, we worked on the Economic Development Bill, which put in a 10-year initiative to strengthen and expand our climate technology sector, really investing in climate tech the way we have done for the life sciences. So this expands our workforce, drives competitive growth, and catalyzes investment in the development of new technology, which quite frankly, we are going to need to reach our climate goals. Our focus this session for 2025 to 2026 is developing our clean energy future, which includes defending and building out our offshore wind resources, incentivizing towns to host clean energy, training a robust clean energy workforce, modernizing our electric grid, and addressing affordability, which is a theme you will see quite frequently this session. As you all might have seen, the governor filed a rather extensive and wonky bill around energy affordability, and we do view that as the main vehicle to get clean energy legislation passed this year. We also intend to continue our work to remove fossil fuels from homes and businesses, including curbing the expansion of the gas system and encouraging heat pump and other clean heat and cooling technologies, including heat loops and things like that. We continue to expand our efforts into transportation to invest in repairs for the MBTA, along with electrification of our buses and commuter rail systems, and particularly expanding access to EV charging. As folks may have seen, the state has delayed implementation, or at least enforcement, of our electric vehicle and clean truck rules. So we want to make sure that in 2 years, when enforcement kicks back on, that we're not in the same place we are now, so that we're continuing the conversation and really working to build out our infrastructure so that folks feel more confident in purchasing EVs. And lastly, but certainly not least, we're looking to make sure that we're funding environmental protection, adaptation, and resilience. We work and we lead the Green Budget Coalition, which recently secured 1% of the overall state budget for the environmental agencies at a time when we're asking them to do more. We want to make sure we're not asking them to do that much more with less. So really making sure we have a robust system here in Massachusetts, particularly at a time where our federal protections are being rolled back or eliminated. And lastly, the other big bill that we anticipate being released over the next couple of weeks, if not sooner, is the environmental bond. As folks may or may not be familiar with the environmental bond, it traditionally comes out every 5 years. This is what funds the capital programs for all of the environmental agencies. We expect that it'll have quite a few outside sections that will be focused on resilience as well as adaptation. And that is kind of another big bill that we see going through the process this year that we aim to add all of our components to all the things we care about. So those are kind of the two big vehicles, as well as the budget, which we continue to focus on. I'd be happy to go into more detail on any of those sectors, or I'd be happy to stop there and take some questions.
I'll ask a question. I was wondering about what does ELM think about the MassSave program, and are there any discussions going on about changing it in any way?
Certainly, and that's a major component right now of the energy affordability bill, looking at the MassSave program overall. We would refute some of the articles that really claim that MassSave is driving most of the energy price, the spikes in energy. Certainly, the price volatility of natural gas and other fossil fuels have played a significant role, if not the leading role, in the price spikes, particularly in the winter, where we saw natural gas prices go up 200% year over year. But we do acknowledge that there could be significant improvements to the MassSave program, some of which have been proposed by the Healy administration, looking at streamlining some of the implementation that they do, looking over all of the, looking at monetizing these bonds over years so that they can have access to more capital, making sure that we're getting into the homes that need it the most. MassSave traditionally has done much better in affluent towns and has been less likely to serve EJ communities. So making sure that, especially with the utilities continuing to be the program administrators, although that would be limited now, based under the proposed law proposed bill by the governor, but we certainly think there are room for improvement in MassSave, but I don't think we're ready to completely throw it out.
And then just a quick follow-up. To the extent that there may or may not be changes to MassSave coming, where do proposed changes originate? Are they primarily, for example, with from the legislature? Are they from the governor? Are they from activist communities? Where are proposals for any changes to MassSave coming from?
Sure. I think for any changes that will come this session, for the legislature, it will be through this energy affordability bill. I expect that both the House and the Senate will put their own touches on it. I know particularly Senator Barrett has a lot of ideas. He is the chair of the Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Committee on the Senate side. He certainly has quite a few ideas on how he would shape MassSave reform. The other big place would be through the DPU, the Department of Public Utilities, as they're the ones that administer the program. That was where, given some of the higher prices, when the program was getting reauthorized, they did cut it fairly significantly, with 500 million coming off of the 3-year plan. So it's kind of in parallel with those two places. But But I think right now, given that that plan was just kind of reauthorized, that we are focused on what the legislature might do to improve MassSave.
Okay. So I'm going to hand it over to Kendra
Mhm.
to do the rest
Yeah,
of
so
the
Linda had
Q&A.
Linda Lancaster had a question in the chat, and her question is, how do you effectively cover such a wide portfolio of objectives? Does ELM have subgroups specializing in various areas? And she has a follow-up question is, do you see any chance of Massachusetts passing some climate bills before the very end of the session? Or corollary, why does it take 2 years to pass these bills?
I'm glad that you guys are starting me off with such simple questions. Uh, Kidding, of course. So the team here at ELM is growing. So when I arrived 7 years ago, there was about 7 of us, and now we're a team of 25. So we have experts over a range of topics. We have a very skilled legislative director who helps me with some of the day-to-day lobbying work. We have a VP of policy, Amy Boyd-Rabin, who does some of our regulatory work as well as being the real brains behind the operation. So if I don't know any questions, I'll be sure to ask Amy and fill you all in. We recently had a grid director join us, given the importance of upgrading the grid and how crucial transmission and interconnection is going to be over the next few years as we look to electrify everything. So we really try to bring in experts on a wide range of topics so that we can speak knowledgeably and be a real resource for the administration as well as, in particular, state lawmakers. As for Massachusetts passing climate bills before the very end of the session, I think it's more likely that the environmental bond will pass before the very end of session. Will it come out of conference committee before the very end of session? I think will remain to be seen. I do think that the big bill that will pass this year, not in the same, the form that it's in now, is the energy affordability bill. I would not expect that bill to pass before the end of the session. Part of it is they're still working on rules. It's my understanding that the House is moving forward with, once they have a hearing, they have 60 days to get the bill out of committee with one 30-day extension allowed. So there's going to be some movement, but they have not agreed on rules. I would say that the Massachusetts has a slow and methodical state legislature that generally needs to wait for deadlines to see bills go across the finish line. So I would anticipate it taking until the end.
And Jay has his hand raised. Jay? Oh,
Okay, we just unmuted. Go ahead, Jerry.
Hey, thank you so much for the information, really valuable. I wondered, could you go into a little more depth on the efforts to stabilize or reduce energy costs in the state?
Sure. So I think we have some ideas on how it will be done. I think one of the real struggles with how we're building out what we view as our energy affordability agenda is that folks are looking for relief now, very understandably. A lot of what we would hope to reform is likely to take a couple years to see the reflection on bills. Obviously, we were hoping that offshore wind, which we have spent significant time on. We also have an offshore wind director, would have really reduced some of the peaks we saw in the winter with wind blowing the strongest. We could have, flattened some of the curve, which would have really helped some of our prices. So in lieu of offshore wind being on, making sure we're bringing on battery storage and solar in a responsible manner, but in a quicker manner. In long term, we're looking at the return on investment that utilities are granted through DPU. It averages about 10% right now, guaranteed rate of return, especially on new infrastructure. I think there's a question in our minds of, does it need to be that high at all times? for other cases, one of the things the administration's bill does that we really agree on is right now there is a 2.5% remuneration agreement between offshore wind companies and the utilities just for taking on the energy contract. So it's a pure 2.5% benefit to the utilities in addition to the clean energy. So we think there are definitely ways that we could reduce prices in our existing, with our existing contracts and infrastructure. We're also looking at, the guaranteed that you would have to be able to, the right to serve. And if there are ways that we can, continue to make sure that everyone has access to reliable heat, but does it always have to be gas? If we say like, if we're looking to electrify everything, there's a good example in the heat loop that is being built out in Framingham. It was free, and the utilities covered all of the bills, and people still opted out to it, which means we now have redundant energy supply in Framingham. So some have access to the heat loops, some retained their fossil fuel infrastructure. And if we're doing that kind of piecemeal process, that is not going to be the best and most affordable way to look at building out our new energy infrastructure. In other cases, there's some red tape that we think adds additional prices that could be eliminated over time. I'd be happy to share our full like 7-page document that we provided to the administration with some of our ideas, both short and long term, for energy affordability that goes into some of the other details. And we certainly will expect to argue for some of those in the bill. And I do think it also comes down to making sure that we're looking at some of the highest costs. Like we should be getting into homes that are using electric heat resistance. They would most quickly see a rate of return and savings if they went to air source heat pumps. So, same to an extent with folks that have oil, but looking at really prioritizing what is the most expensive way to heat our homes, and then making sure that we are doing everything we can, to transition in a fair way. So I think there's more answers out there, and certainly folks have other ideas that we are digging into, but we expect to spend most of our session focused on that.
One follow-up on that?
Just wanted to say thank you, and please send Gary the 7-page paper, and he'll send it to me.
And just FYI, we're a group here in Northampton that's affiliated with Citizens Climate Lobby. That's why there's multiple people.
Okay, we have a question in the chat from Shayla Bruce. Does Massachusetts financial deficit affect the funding awarded to programs under the environmental bond bill? And if so, do we have any insight into how this might impact clean energy initiatives?
Sure. Meaning we don't currently have a deficit. The states are not allowed to run a deficit like the federal government is. We certainly are looking at a tougher fiscal picture, which will necessitate perhaps a smaller budget moving forward. The budget they just passed, and they're in the middle of conferencing, does raise the budget year over year by about 3%. I think we will continue to see that until we find out exactly what happens with the federal cuts. With the environmental bond bill, it's a little separate because it is the capital plan. And each year the state has a set cap based off of the numbers from the administration, the Office of Administration and Finance, which sets the cap. Traditionally, that cap for the amount of money that the state raises goes up by about $150 million a year. This year, they were a bit more restrictive. Overall, traditionally, about $330 million goes to environmental agencies. The number you will see in the environmental bond is going to be significantly higher. The biggest thing is the money in environmental bonds that the legislature passes is basically all funny money until it ends up in the capital plan. So our biggest emphasis on the bond is making sure the authorizations are there that we are looking for, but the rubber really hits the road in the capital plan. So we spend most of our time trying to lobby the Office of Administration and Finance to ensure that our top priorities get into that capital plan, into that 330 million, because that is what actually gets spent. And given it's the state's, the state has the capital plan for all of the funding. So you all have probably heard about the housing bond, the transportation bond, the economic development bond. All of these pieces do, for lack of a better term, do have to compete for a slice of that pie, and that pie only gets bigger by about 100 million a year. So it's really important that we emphasize what actually gets into the capital plan. So I don't want to sour you on how important it is to get the authorizations into the environmental bond, but we don't necessarily always prioritize adding 5 or 10 million to authorizations. I think we'll spend a lot of time on the outside sections trying to get additional policy into law, and then we will focus on ensuring that we spend that 330 million, give or take, as efficiently as possible. Does that answer your question?
Shayla can ask a
Yes,
follow-up.
thank you.
Okay. We've got a question from Bruce. Bruce Rue, how can high school students support the work of ELM, especially if there are enthusiastic lobbyists?
Sure. We always always support youth and trying to get folks more involved. I think we can be supportive when there are hearings and opportunities to testify in front of the State House. We also, I should have asked beforehand, we do have a C4 and electoral arm, so I don't want to risk blurring the lines too much. But if folks are interested in getting involved in making sure that we're electing folks who are going to work on climate, we also have tons of opportunities to do that on my team as well. We have a fellow program. So for folks usually in college, but occasionally a very enthusiastic senior in high school, we have opportunities to intern with us and get a sense to see how we work, but certainly can provide opportunities and at least information about how to get involved at the State House. But the biggest thing is calling your lawmaker, not just doing a form email. You all can imagine, but State House, state reps, and senators do not get nearly as many calls as federal officials. If you can drive, 5, 6 calls into an office, they take that pretty seriously. Form letters, not to the same extent, but they pay attention, they tally those. But getting constituents to reach out really does move the needle in Massachusetts.
Interesting. Okay, and there's a question from Hannah Rudick. I'm not sure I've got her name pronounced correctly. Considering the federal suspension of new offshore wind lease sales, how is ELM adapting its strategy to maintain momentum in offshore wind development? And what measures are being taken to mitigate potential ecological impacts?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about it. For us, it's been a bit of a reset in trying to build more local support and spending more time in communities, and truly understanding some of the concerns, pushing back a little bit against some of the misinformation and disinformation that has really taken hold in some of these communities, and really trying to talk to people. I think sometimes environmentalists get a bad rap, and sometimes it's true about kind of being a little bit condescending or just not fully understanding what local communities' concerns are. So we've taken a lot of time to build back some trust in communities, work with them, work with town governments, figure out what the most important way to partner in these communities are. We continue to work. We helped found the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition, which is a coalition of over 100 organizations, including labor and environmental justice organizations that are continuing to support the efforts of responsibly developed offshore wind, continuing to support infrastructure funding for some of our major ports in Salem, in Somerset, making sure that, in 2 years, hopefully when there's more of a backstop, federally that we can move forward, but certainly in 4 years, making sure we're ready to go, trying to build out some of those supply chain, make sure we are working with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center to have the workforce necessary to make sure that these industries can move quicker and also use, local labor as opposed to always having to rely in some cases on, international companies and international crews. So one of the kind of more unique opportunities we have right now is given where some of the investments were in terms of building out the infrastructure. It's in states like Louisiana, in North Carolina. So really partnering with our colleagues nationally and including with partners we don't always get a chance to work with because, Massachusetts is not going to build out the entire supply chain. It would make no sense. So really making sure that folks in Louisiana know that if Massachusetts projects can move forward, there's going to be an opportunity for their ships to be used, some of their other infrastructure to be used. So really building out that network and making sure that we have the pieces in play for when we are able to kind of energize some of the permitting process, and like I said, also making sure that our process here in Massachusetts goes a little smoother than it has in the past. For ecological impacts, we've worked closely with both the administration and the legislature to make sure in particular there are wildlife considerations and other, environmental considerations put right into the contracts. So whenever we're putting out the RFPs, there are additional points for the developers who are doing more mitigation so that we are doing it in the most responsible way possible. We're not willing to just put clean energy above everything. We really want to make sure this is done in a holistic way that makes sense for everybody.
Okay, we have, I guess this is the last question. Again, another one from Linda. MassSave's 2025-2027 budget included funding to extend their pilot moderate income program, no cost heat pump, weatherization, panel upgrades, etc., to all Mass communities. This would be a huge help getting people to adopt heat pumps. It got cut when Governor Healy reduced the MassSave budget. Do you see any other ways to help moderate income homeowners afford heat pumps?
Yeah, this is another great question. There is going to be a proposed moderate income rate in the energy affordability bill. And so that would be a significant way to address some of these, some of the issues or the fact that the pilot got cut. There's also a potential proposal to allow you to basically finance your heat pump through your bill. So the company could install it and you would pay it back, with your energy bill. So there are ways to kind of subsidize how you would pay it over time to make it more accessible as opposed to having to pay, around $20,000 at least up front in some cases. So kind of looking at it two ways, making sure that there is a moderate income rate moving forward, and then looking at, unusual ways or different ways to allow for the financing of heat pumps beyond just the Green Bank, which we would love to be a bigger program than it is right now, and how we can really utilize the Green Bank that we did, that the state did set up fairly quickly, or I'm sorry, the Climate Bank, not the Green Bank, but given some of the federal funds being frozen for quite some time, we don't have all the funds that we had hoped to have in the Climate Bank. So in the meantime, we're looking at other ways to ensure that more folks have access to these programs and to these resources so that it's not just wealthy families that can afford heat pumps.
Thank you, Casey. That was great. I really appreciate your taking the time to be with us tonight and give us all this great information. We did make a recording, so we'll be sharing it with the rest of our volunteers. And I don't know, we'll be in touch. If there's anything we can do to help, let us know.
Great. I will send you, Gary, that 7-page energy affordability, as well as my contact information if folks are interested in hearing more about a certain topic or how they can get involved. Always happy to answer questions. And I really
Great.
appreciate you all taking the time.
Great. Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
All right, take care.
Thank you.